Thank you so much, folks, for waiting. We have Nada all the way from California joining us for ethics and entrepreneurship session. Thank you, Nada. Good morning to you.
Good evening to you, Sanjay. Thank you so much for having me on.
Pleasure. So let's begin with this. That capitalism is based on the ability for business, markets, goods, and services to be at profit, right? And profit is not a dirty word, but businesses need to explain how it has been achieved. Milton Friedman, American economist and Nobel Prize winner, has said that business should be solely devoted to increasing profit as long as they engage in an open, free competition devoid of fraud. So, as the study of entrepreneurship and study of business ethics are becoming increasingly established, and the intersection of entrepreneurship and ethics is receiving a lot of venture capital attention. We have Miss Nada joining us from Santa Cruz, California. Nada, you teach across subject of ethics and entrepreneurship at UCSC and Stanford. What does this subject mean? Can you throw some light on a broad topic it covers? How do you define ethics? What is ethics?
So, in my opinion, ethics is the moral structure by which a person lives their life. So then that begs the question, what is morals? And morals are the way at which somebody decides if something is right or wrong. And so it's that compass by which we all have internally that is applied when we're given a question. And then that question is, should I do this or shouldn't I do this? And is it right or is it wrong? And so the study of ethics is that idea of how do we create a system by which we can maybe more easily decide if something is right or wrong. And I teach 5 primary kinds of systems. That could be utilitarianism, that could be a value-based system, that could be a how do we care for each other system. And so it's up to the person to decide which system works best for them and
So
their culture.
basically, the way you are describing, if I have to nutshell in a short sentence, understand it's a decision making system, whether what is right and what is wrong. That's how you would put it across ethics in terms of the morality side of it. For how is this subject important for startups and budding entrepreneurs? What is the relationship between business ethics or ethics and entrepreneurship? How would you work on that?
Well, there's a couple different ways. When I first begin all of my classes, no matter where I'm teaching, no matter who or how old my students are, I do teach a range from 12-year-olds to 50-year-olds, MBA students. I always start with the beginning of corporations, which, by my research, is with the East Indian Company that in essence was given the right to colonize. And so corporations have a pretty negative history. And so I invite my students to think about that history and how their company can be different or in reaction to that. So a company begins with a founder. That founder has that essential idea, that solution that they want to bring to the world by finding some problem that they need to solve. And so the company is really based on that founder's essential characters, their characteristics. And so a founder needs to be very careful how they begin their company. And so they then start looking for a team to augment their skill sets so that they can create a business that is sustainable and scalable. And so the ethos of a company is embedded in their founders' principles. And so as a founder, you need to think about what kind of company culture do you want to create? So that's one way of looking at it. How you as a founder are affecting the culture of your company. Another way to look at it is through the evolutions of entrepreneurship, capitalism, and businesses. We've gone through a lot of iterations through the evolution of capitalism, corporate structures that we've gotten to today. And a very big prominent idea is this idea of the 3 Ps. We have the people, the planet, and then profit. So first taking care of your people, the people that work for you, the people that are your customers, that are affected by your product or service, or that are using your product or service. And so I try to have my students think about how do we embed these principles in your corporate actions by which you run your business, create your products and services. Another kind of bigger structure that people think about is this cradle to grave idea. So for me, one of the essential qualities for a moral system is responsibility. How are you responsible through your actions, through your decision making? And the same thing is reflected in a company. How is a company responsible for which they run their business? And so does that responsibility stop once the consumer consumes or buys their product or uses their service? Or is the company responsible for that product or service throughout the entire cycle? Where does it go when it's no longer being used?
So, from your perspective, it is about that it touches all the customer life cycle.
So then you go into the cradle to cradle. So it's not just about where does that product or service go when it's being done, but the workers, the creators that help produce it, where do they go? Because as a leader of a company, as the CEO, as the founder, not only are you beholden to your customers, you're also beholden to your workforce. And so keeping in mind that there's these very fast cycles by which ideas and services and products are being used. It's down to a year and a half you may have for your sales cycle. So you have to constantly be thinking about what is going to be my next product and service so that I can keep my workers working, not having to lay them off, because those workers rely upon that company to pay for their livelihood, pay for their families.
Sure. So, Nada, if you can just touch upon how different is ethics for an entrepreneur and a non-entrepreneur? Should employees be part of this ethical journey? How would you differ in founder entrepreneur different than a non-entrepreneur with respect to ethics? How is ethics applicable to human as in general?
Well, they're similar because, again, it's about responsibility. I think with an entrepreneur, the responsibility is even heavier or bigger because it goes beyond just what your influence is on the earth by which you decide by which you make your decisions. But as a CEO, as a leader of a company, it goes beyond just your responsibility. You are also then responsible for how your workers and your people how their decisions vis-a-vis through the company, their work through the company, how's their work then influencing the world? Is it making it a better place? Is it or is it negatively affecting the people, the planet?
Sure. So, how would you put? How does an entrepreneur really make ethical decision? Is there like a software algorithm saying that if then yes, you go this way, all else go this way? Is this something more psychological, or can I throw maths to this problem? Is this something which is a structured approach which somebody can learn, apply? How does this whole ethical decision and ethical behavior come into entrepreneurs?
So I believe it starts with the person investigating themselves, doing an internal discovery of what are they motivated by. So again, when I teach ethics, I give them let's say 6 different systems by which they can choose that then governs their decision-making policy. So let's say it's a value-based system. They have values that they hold in an ideal level. So when I look at the world, is it, let's see, what would be a value-based? Am I making some kind of contribution to my fellow neighbor, to my community? Am I, what would be another value base?
More of a social entrepreneurship?
Excuse me?
Social entrepreneurship, more kind of.
Yeah, so social entrepreneurship is just a category of the broader term of entrepreneurship, where somebody is motivated to create a solution to make the world a better place. And so you as an entrepreneur need to know who you yourself are. How do you make your decisions? And of course, you know, philosophy and studying philosophy is very helpful for that. Not everybody's interested in that. And so I try to make it in a very bite-sized, easy way so that they can, you know, grasp it and really run with it. It's a deep internal motivator. And those can be, of course, implanted or embedded in your family, in your bigger community, in your society. And so many times that's where we start with, is what are the traditions by which I was born into? Do not lie, do not steal, respect your elders. Those would be values that I then hold at my highest, and I make sure that my decisions are governed by those qualities. Am I doing something to help my neighbor, basically? And so you have to start with, who are you as a person? And I think that that's a really important place to start, not just to figure out what your morals are as an entrepreneur, but what are your motivations? What are the passions that you have? And what are my strengths? Because I teach a strengths-based leadership idea where we lead through our gifts and strengths that we have, those things that come easily to us, those things that we're confident in. And as a leader, there are many different kinds of leaders. There are leaders that are based in strategy. There are leaders that are based in community growth and social bonds. There are leaders that are motivated by execution. There are leaders that are motivated by, let's see, what would be another? So there's many different types of leaders. They're all good. But what they all have in common is that they're leading through their strengths, their personal abilities. And then what you can do, a smart, CEO would then look around and say, I'm not strong in my strategy, and then find either co-founders or partners that can then augment that part of your personality that would then bring a whole, all of the aspects that you need for a successful company.
I mean, personally, being an investor and having worked with over 150 plus startup companies as a portfolio, I've learned that, successful businesses are based on 3-leg stool, right? As a stool, you need at least 3 legs to stand across. If anything is weak, like one leg is weak, then you topple kind of. So first leg we talk across is investors who provide funds for business to operate, right? And these investors risk, and they should be rewarded with profits. That's the first, dharma of or a value or ethics for an entrepreneur. The second is the employees who should be treated fairly for the good work and compensated reasonably, pay with benefits. And the business should abide laws and regulations. The third leg is the customer. Without customer, the employees will not have jobs. There will be no profit. What do you think of this analogy? Do you have anything to support what are those examples which an entrepreneur should look upon in each of these kind of segments, where one is the investor, one is the employee, and the third is customer? How does ethics combine all these three into one?
So we have to, I guess, choose really carefully. You have to, again, know who you are as a founder and surround yourself with people that have a similar ethos. Your company has a culture, and that culture trickles down from the very top executives down to the lowest, let's say, least skilled worker in your company. So we have to think about how we're modeling as the founder, as the leader, how we're modeling our behavior so that goes throughout our entire company, so that everyone sees you just like a parent, right? The kids look up to you, and you need to model the behavior that you want your children to grow up with and become. It's the same thing for a founder. They need to model the behavior that they want their employees and their team, right? So one of the things is that are those employees that you're describing, that leg, is that the team that you are surrounding yourself with? And that could also include of course, the executive team as being the most important. As far as the funders, being very careful who your partners are, because your funders are your partners, and so your funders must have also a similar moral compass, or there's going to be a great deal of conflict. There's this new type of system called B corporations. I don't know if you've heard about it, but they're corporation. It's a kind of a way to be able to embed within your corporate bylaws your ethics. So one of the stories that I like to talk about is this company. It's called Ben & Jerry's. It's an ice cream company. And sure. Ben & Jerry started with these two guys, Ben and Jerry, these hippies from Vermont. And they just wanted to make really good ice cream using the best ingredients. And a few years ago, they decided that they wanted to, get milk from a specific type of dairy that does very good animal health and they treat their animals really well. Well, the shareholders sued Ben & Jerry because they felt that spending money on this kind of ingredient, this expensive type of milk, was taking away from their profit. And so Ben & Jerry's had to sell off their profit because their shareholders, because they realized that their impetus to start the company had been usurped by the shareholders. And so there's this idea of where you have to start thinking about beyond the shareholders, but who are the stakeholders? So it's not just the shareholders that are involved in your company, but it's all the people that are affected, that are within your ecosystem of your company.
Very true.
How are they being affected by it?
Look upon, it's a great analogy where, or an example where stakeholders and shareholders, how do you differentiate between them? So we have some questions already coming in, Nada. So let's try to take them up before we move forward on our conversation. So I'm just trying to flash, when the smartness is the new normal, then where does ethics come from? Like today everybody would like to shine irrespective of ethics, right? And showcase and brag about it, whether it is right or wrong. Smartness is the cool quotient. So where does ethics stand in this times?
Well, I haven't really, heard this trend of smartness. I think we all have to be smart and strategic and effective with our companies, and how that, that affects the world, the shareholders and the stakeholders. I think that you can be, let's see, I think that, again, going back to that, what are the examples? How do I model my company? How do I model by my behavior? And can a company that is lying really be ethical? So if maybe that's your system, is that I'm going to do whatever it takes to bring profit to my shareholders, then that is what's governing your decision making. And I feel like that's a very short-sighted way of looking at it, because it will catch up with you.
Sure.
If you are lying, eventually that lie will find itself. It's short-legged lies usually, and so I feel
we
like
have one more question, Nada. In India, we have various cultures and different ethics. So, what do we do if there is a clash between our partners, employees, and customers? What comes first? Partners, employees, customers, or even shareholders, investors?
I think there has to be this idea of a win-win. We can be creative. Entrepreneurs at a core have to be very creative. In a way, they have to be artists. They have to figure out how to solve a problem that maybe no one else sees. And so taking in consideration all of the players, all of the shareholders, and communicating with them, and being able to find a common ground that will be a benefit for everyone. I truly believe that you can bring a win-win to situations, as long as you are communicating with everyone, that everyone's needs and agendas are transparent, that are brought to the table, and that there can be a way that everyone benefits.
What is your? Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to go back to your three-legged stool.
Sure.
I think another aspect that maybe can't be brought into your analogy is timing. Because there are many studies that show that you can have the best team, you can have the best idea, but if your timing, if your technology is a little bit too advanced, if the infrastructure in which your technology is embedded in, if that infrastructure isn't ready for your idea, it's not going to be able to be sustainable or scalable. So timing also has to be a big, important idea that you keep in mind, because you have to constantly be looking at what are the trends. For instance, with COVID-19 crisis, who would have seen that 3 months ago? Who would have realized that the entire world would be going into shelter in place?
Absolutely.
And I know that India already has, like, in the back of your minds as entrepreneurs, you understand that there's hundreds of millions of people that are living in poverty. And
Right.
on top of that, you just saw 100 million jobs disappear in the blink of an eye because of the COVID crisis. And that there's this huge sector in India that are mom and pop based small businesses that are service oriented. How can you deliver a service in a shelter-in-place world? Those are the things that we need to be moving on right now to figure out how do we keep them. Obviously, getting on digitally is a big part of that. And so then you need an infrastructure that will be able to deliver the internet to those people so that they can go digitally, right?
So, what's your view? We have a lot of audiences which are startups, entrepreneurs, and venture capitalists who listen to this 100x live sessions. Does ethics apply in venture capital business? Because lot of sayings and quotes go by. This is a vulture business, not a venture capital business. So, what do you think? Does ethics apply in venture capital business?
So, ethics is a neutral term. We have our ethics. We have our moral compass. And if your moral compass is to only make money, if that's your driving force, then cheating, stealing, not being transparent can be a part of your tool set. And so we have to think about what kind of ethics do you have? And it goes back to that question of who are your partners, and being very careful that your partners are in alignment with your company's moral structure. And so first looking at the person, or the team, and what are their tenets? What are those things that drive them? And is that in, does that follow my moral, or me as a CEO or leader of a company? And so they do have an ethics, but it may not be the ethics that you hold dearly. This reminds me of the question that someone asked about how India is a multicultural extravaganza. And I believe that there are ethics that are held dear to all across those cultures. Being, let's see, the most ancient of the Indian, the Ayurvedic ideals of moderation, of living in harmony with nature, living in harmony with your community. I believe that those are things that everyone can agree upon. We all need clean air and clean water for our kids. We all have basic human needs that cross everything.
So we have one more comments which has come in across, saying that I'm sure leader across the world would be guided by doing human things is always right. Not right thing may not be human. Right, so that's what. So, any comments on this quote which has come across in the current crisis to manage and especially employees?
So, I think I feel for all those small businesses that are in extreme duress right now, that are scrambling to keep their employees in jobs, keep those families fed. And so I think it goes back to having to get on to the internet, going virtual. There's been this very slow movement to go virtual for many reasons, because of the infrastructure that I mentioned earlier, the lack of ability to get online. But as we move forward, we need to understand that divide is just going to get greater and greater if we don't fix the infrastructure that allows everyone to be able to get on, because it's really going to be who's on the internet and who's not, who's able to sell their products and services virtually and who's not going to be able to. The days of the brick and mortar, people just walking by and coming into your shop are probably very gone and very different than what we have, what we've had.
We have one more important question which has come up. What is the best way to convey the ethics to a young team by a young founder? There is one of the questions which typically we keep on discussing, right? What is the way? Do you write some code of ethics? Does it make sense? Do you, even when you start your startup, do you build a code of ethics? Typically large organizations write a code of ethics and code of conduct as a best practices. How does one startup build and convey this best ethics?
So you start with the team, the founding team, the founder, and if that's co-founders, and then you build the team with people that are similar with your ideas. You be very transparent about what are the mission and the vision of your company. You co-create a document that puts those things down, that says these are the things that we are motivated by and we do not want to lose sight of as we evolve and move forward and get bigger, hopefully, in scale. That we will always have these fundamental core values, and that should be co-created at the very beginning and embedded, and something that is brought back over and over again over the years, so that you are, as times change, as things happen, going back to those mission and going back to your vision and reevaluating it and making sure that maybe some of those things that you started with are no longer needed and are no longer value-based or helping you forward. For instance, my husband works at Intel. He's worked at Intel for nearly 30 years now. He actually was recruited when we were still in college. He's probably the only person I know that's worked with one company his entire career. And he has a badge, right? He has this badge that allows him to get in there. And on the back of his picture are the core values of Intel. They have it front and center. They have it all over their building. They want it to constantly be in the forefront of their workers so that as they're doing their work, they're reminded, these are our core values. This is what we stand for.
Basically, first, the great point which I'm taking away is co-create that ethics rules, or set the ground rules by co-creating it. And second, ethics are a living document. It's not something you build it one time, you revisit it again and again, and work across very closely. Uh, Typically, the challenge which we have seen across, and most of the time we have seen in the news media or complaints, are typically about sales ethics or selling, right? Can you share some examples how entrepreneurs can do ethical selling, right? Most of the times we see even large corporations engaging in mis-selling financial products, or mis-selling to a customer just to achieve their performance. How does selling or sales ethics work? Any examples?
Well, we've had a trend over the last couple of years. You know, when the internet first started, there was this huge void as to figure out how do we make a revenue stream out of this new tool that we have, this new device, the internet, the World Wide Web. And so slowly, all kinds of things were figured out. And then one of the big ones was the freemium model. I'll give my product or service away for free, by which the way I make my money, let's say Google, is through advertising. Gen Z, our newest generations, the children that were born into a digital world, can spot that a mile away. They know when they're being used. They know when their data is being mined and it's being thrown back in their faces, and they're not standing for it. When I first started teaching, even in the last 5 years, when I first started teaching entrepreneurship, the freemium model was one of the first revenue streams that the kids would go for. Now, this generation, they're thinking of different ways that is not advertising based, that they can create a revenue stream from. And so, having various subscription-based, levels, figuring out how you can create a revenue stream that isn't based on using your customers' data, or if you are going to use your customers' data, being transparent about that, letting your users or your customers know that when you come to use, my website, we are going to be tracking what you're doing, and
So
are
be
you
as
okay with that?
transparent as what you can be, right? In that sense,
Right. And
uh,
so this
right.
idea of knowing and
Mm.
having the choice, being able to say no, I don't want your I don't want to use, I don't want you mining my data.
Gotcha. We have one more question coming from my team member. How do you avoid getting into echo chamber of ethics and keep updating your worldview and standards? You mentioned it's a living document. You keep changing, your point of view keeps on changing. You learn something new. How do you keep updated? What's the method? Is there a strategy? Is there some business model or is there a framework to follow?
So I think the idea of having that, I always talk to my students about the systems view. As an entrepreneur, you're constantly looking at the macro, at the big view, and you're looking at the micro. You're looking at the details, diving deeper. How do we keep both of those perspectives at the same time, so that we understand that from the bigger picture, our business is many times embedded in someone else's business. So what's their model? And how is that then influencing how they deal with us, right? Like I was saying with the funders, the venture capitalists, your company, if you're taking money from this venture capital company, is a part of their business plan. And so the bigger view that you can keep in understanding how the entire system works, because now we're at a global level. You have to keep your eye on the global workings. We are so interconnected that we just saw that a pandemic can happen within a month or 2 months. And so understanding how you are connected in the entire system and how your changes and your actions influence that entire system. And so you know, staying on top with your work, you know, being in on LinkedIn, following the thinkers. Somebody that I really like is Ashok Bardam. He is of Indian progeny, and he he taught at UC Berkeley in the entrepreneurship and business departments, and he writes about how to move forward with AI and the loss of many jobs to automation. How do we keep the divide between those that have access to the internet and those that don't? How do we increase that?
We have one more question, Nada. As a founding team, we have disparate ethical codes on personal level, but then there will be an agreed upon ethical code which needs to be adhered. Which one is more important? Is it the company ethics or your personal ethics?
Well,
How do you differentiate between company and personal ethics?
I don't know if you can. I think that
You are working, so it's one and the same kind
yeah,
of stuff.
I
Yeah.
think that someone that has very strong, very strong moral compass, if their company is doing actions that go against that, then either they try to change.
So that brings me to the question of, what would be your views on the Theranos, such a infamous scandal. What can it teach about business ethics? How would you view that? Right. That brings to the next question.
Well, that's an excellent example for business ethics, and right away, I think you can learn from the fact that they were completely non-transparent. In fact, anyone at the very beginning that disagreed with the executive team and said, "Hey, this product actually doesn't work," they were fired. They were eliminated. So having a culture in your company that allows people to come to you and tell you, "Hey, I've got a problem with this," or "I see something." So having an open door policy that makes people feel confident that they won't lose their job if they disagree with what their executives are doing. So having many different voices, allowing those different voices to be heard, having transparency in the dealings in your company. Why not show us what's going on and where you're getting the money and how you're using the money?
Great.
Why do you have to?
On the closing side of it, you've given us enough time. We have extended, but let me just take some more of your time. Hope you wouldn't mind. In case of entrepreneurs, constantly they face dilemma on taking decisions. One is from the ethical side. In terms of a lot of startup founders would believe across, fake it till you make it, right? So get some fake performance reviews, or hiring team from competition, or go shopping out. Once you have a term sheet, take that term sheet and go and shop around to get a better term sheet from a VC, or nepotism in hiring and firing, or products get copied across. I mean, there are various instances where entrepreneurs would have across those ethical lines, or maybe that's the way, as you mentioned, across what's a moral compass, right, for all these founders to take those steps. How would one deal as a founder, because you are in dilemma? What should a founder do when they are facing these situations? Any comments?
Well, I think that the founder is constantly having disparate pressures that they have to balance and keep keep balanced. And so the things that you mentioned, those examples, those all go against my moral compass. That's not the kind of company that I want to work for. And I know that there are many examples of ideas being stolen. And so that's why you have to constantly be thinking about, what is my value? What is the value that I'm delivering with my company? And how am I different? How am I differentiating myself from my competition? So keeping an eye on your competition as much as, and that's also by watching your churn, right? As soon as you see that your churn is growing, you need to find out what's that influence. Where are they going? Where are your customers? Why are they leaving you? And then being able to very quickly, being very, very quickly able to pivot if you need to pivot or iterate to make your differentiation. So I tell my students, customer discovery never ends. It doesn't just begin when you're starting up. Customer discovery has to be a constant activity within your company so that you have a direct understanding of what your customers are looking for, what they want, what is making your product their whole solution, and differentiating yourself from other companies. I have that, maybe it's a naive idea that customers are going to stay with those that they also find to be in alignment with their moral compass as well. And as I said before, Generation Z, these kids, they have a different moral understanding than us elders, right? We grew up in a capitalistic free-for-all, I'm from Yugoslavia, so I actually was born in a communist country where entrepreneurship was, underground, and but that's why my parents left. Actually, my dad was a repressed entrepreneur in a communist country, and came to the U.S. And when I was young, my dad would say, "Nada, you are in a capitalistic system. You are either used or you be used." That's what I grew up with. And now I tell my students, there is another way. You can be smarter than that. You do not have to use your workers. You can all be cooperating and collaborating together so that everyone's needs is taken care of. And Generation Z, these kids growing up, that's what they're looking for. They're rejecting.
So final question, Nada, on a closing note, on a positive side, what would be the rewards of becoming an ethical entrepreneur? What are the rewards? I mean, being an ethical entrepreneur and being ethical, what is the benefits?
Well, Socrates would say that you can look back on your life and be proud of yourself, and that your children can look at you and be proud of you, and the world can look at you and be proud of you. And is that how you want to be seen? Those last days, maybe, hopefully we'll all have that experience of being in our deathbeds and having the luxury of looking back at our lives. Will we be regretting what we've done? Will we be regretting what our companies have done? How they've left the world? Have they made it a better place? Or have they taken it and made it a worse place? Those are the rewards, I believe.
Fantastic, Nada. That was on this closing wisdom note. Thank you so much for your time. We extended almost like 10 minutes more, and you gave us your time. It was such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for being on 100x Live. To sum it up, we differentiate between your stakeholder and shareholders. Try to ensure that you co-create your ethical documents or code of ethics or best practices. And your code of ethics are living documents. Keep revisiting them, talking about them, discussing with your team members. And as Nada on the closing wisdom notes, quoting Socrates, would you be proud in terms of things what you have been done, or would you sleep with a sound sleep? And that's what ethics rewards brings across and bringing to an ethical entrepreneur. Thank you so much. Nada teaches at UCSC and Stanford, ethics and entrepreneurship. And thank you so much for on 100x Live.
Oh, Sanjay, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you and thinking about your questions. And please, if anyone has more questions, reach out to me in LinkedIn. I'm happy to, I'm a teacher. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.